Marcosatsu.
In the modern day, the Western Tokusatsu community have dubbed what's known as the Big Three of Toku, three main shows that pretty much everybody knows: Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, and Ultraman. At first, this seems pretty obvious. I mean, no duh, Kamen Rider is one of, if not the most successful tokusatsu of all time, only ever having a rival in Ultraman. They've both been around since forever, have an ocean of content, and make their respective companies a ton of money. Plus, Sentai is the sister show and had its own huge success, especially during Rider's hiatus. And it's the baseline for a show about a colorful team of heroes. If it doesn't have the same financial success currently, then it at least ingrained itself as a permanent part of pop culture history. Without Sentai, then we wouldn't have Power Rangers, which has its own foot in at least Western pop culture too. Wait, what about Power Rangers? Shouldn't it be recognized as one of the main pillars of tokusatsu shows? You could paraphrase the Big Three as Kamen Rider, Super Sentai / Power Rangers, and Ultraman. But then that becomes a mouthful and more of the Big 3.5. Maybe it's implied that Power Rangers is just kinda part of this holy trinity somewhere in the middle of it all. I don't know about that. I feel like Power Rangers really does hold its own compared to Sentai. After all, I wouldn't try to compare the two series in the first place since they really only share suits and some footage. Even the Ranger shows that adapt their counterparts the closest still are two completely different viewing experiences. Wild Force is pretty much one-to-one with the original Gao Ranger at times, and even then, Gao Ranger vs Super Sentai is not forever read. But who am I to say if Power Rangers deserves its own seat in the Toku circle? I'm just an American who prefers Kamen Rider. Although Korea does use the Power Rangers name for their own seasons, and some Spanish regions straight up just switch between Power Rangers and Sentai, but okay, I'll get to the point. I personally really like the idea of a Big Three, or at least a group of shows that can be considered pillars of a modern community. They're easy pinpoints for anyone to discuss and learn about, but at the same time, I feel like it's too limiting, almost as if these are the shows that we have to talk about, rather than the shows we just so happen to talk about. And that's mainly because these three shows are constantly pushing content, if not weekly, then at the very least, yearly. Sure, Godzilla has been around even longer than Ultraman, and it does have its own huge fan base, but Toho is only releasing Godzilla content in trickles. Even then, the animated movies and comics aren't nearly as popular as a movie release. Japan has Shin Godzilla, which was extremely successful both critically and financially, and as of this recording, there's a cryptic new Godzilla film being worked on. And that's it. At least Legendary has King Kong and the Monsterverse. Godzilla's singular point seems to be way too quote-unquote high concept for a general audience. Which I have to shout out monstrosities here because tackling all that seems extremely hard. And there's also Gen Urobuchi's animated Godzilla trilogy, which just doesn't come up in a conversation. Toho also released some short series, such as Godziban, but those aren't as impactful as a theatrically released film. I'd say Godzilla still deserves to be called a pillar of tokusatsu. He's as much into pop culture as Super Sentai and Power Rangers. The phrases, "Is this Power Rangers?" or "Is this Godzilla?" exist for a reason. The general audience knows of both concepts. Maybe the average person may not know about Power Rangers RPM or Godzilla Tokyo SOS, but they at least know of just that Power Rangers or Godzilla thing. Now I know some of you might be saying, well, such and such show deserves to be called pillars too, but be honest. Does anyone actually think something like Metal Heroes, Gekko Kamen, Giant Robo, Ryukendo, Redman, France 5, Grand Caesar, Legend Hero, or even Dogengers really deserve to be called pillars? Gekko Kamen may be called the first Henshin Hero show, and Metal Heroes had its own long run, but where are they today? There was a time that Giant Robo was the second biggest tokusatsu to Ultraman, and though it's important in its own right, it doesn't have the same kind of longevity and footprint on pop culture as Ultraman. That's what I think it boils down to. A proper presence in pop culture that should have constant discussion be cemented in someone's mind as a household name. That's why it's so easy to call Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, and Ultraman the Big Three, because they're ongoing properties. But that's also why I think Power Rangers and Godzilla should be in the conversation too. Well, I think there's one more series that deserves it, and I've been saying this for a long time.
Where there is light, shadows lurk and fear reigns. Yet by the blade of nights, mankind was given hope.
Garo. Maybe it's a controversial opinion. Garo is the most recent of any big toku, and it's a huge departure from its more younger focused peers. Is there even any space to truly call Garo a pillar of Tokusatsu? Yes. This may just be me and my circle personally, but Garo does fit into its own conversation with Toku. It's so different from Sentai and Ultraman that Garo has to squeeze into the minds of viewers in some form. Even if it's newer, it has a slew of content that new viewers can watch and learn about. And it's even easier to compare Garo to other adult shows like Kamen Rider Amazons and Black Sun. Basically, Garo has not just a place, but an important place. It all started from the very first series in 2005, simply titled Garo. And I've also heard it with a subtitle, The Chapter of the Black Wolf. This was created and designed by Keita Mamiya, who himself is a veteran tokusatsu writer and director. Through carefully pitching and development, the series came to be produced by Bandai, and unconventionally, a film company called Tohoku Shinsha. This made the budget 2 times higher than the usual tokusatsu for the time, and yeah, it definitely shows in how stylistic it is. It looks expensive for the time. The Garo armor alone is iconic, maybe not as much as a monocolor spandex suit, but memorable nonetheless. It's beautiful and recognizable. The story itself was also incredible, detailing Koga Saejima, the apparent heir to the Makai Knight title as Garo, and his battle against the demonic horrors, lavish CGI, extravagant gore, high-stakes drama, and nudity. This was a tokusatsu that explicitly wasn't for kids. It aired at a late time slot, and it was clear from the start that this was only the beginning. After 2 television movies, however, it lay dormant for a few years. And then, it got turned into a pachinko game, giving this franchise the funding it needed for future installments. Capitalism, I guess. The film Garo Red Requiem kicked things off again in 2010, and then it came back to TV with Garo Makai Senki the next year. That's when it became a yearly series. There's a ton of iconic stuff to come out of the shows, whether it's from sequels, films, spin-offs involving Garo's rival Zero, and animated adaptations. Individual battles are singled out as being incredible examples of tokusatsu, even with a lot of its CGI. And really, isn't that a great reason why it should be in the top tiers of tokusatsu? When you remove the gore, the nudity, the dark storylines, all the stuff that's quote-unquote way too dark for kids, you're still left with a shining example of visual flair, in due part of the CGI being used to great effect. Even the animated entries of Garo emulate that style well. It's something that's so unique to the series, to the point that there's a stark difference between the CGI in Garo to the CGI in Kamen Rider or Super Sentai. The most exciting thing about Garo is that it follows this lineage of tokusatsu perfectly. Ultraman may not have been the very first henshin hero show in its strictest definition, but it is the show that defined what tokusatsu on television is. It had production philosophies that were observed and definitely inspired Kamen Rider. As Kamen Rider itself evolved, a show involving 5 Kamen Riders was pitched, and that was streamlined by Shotaro Ishinomori to become Go Ranger, creating Super Sentai. So, when you have Keita Mamiya, someone who's worked on both properties, who creates a show that has its own definitive style and tone, wouldn't that be the next logical step? And of course, the Metal Heroes franchise was something to take note of. It made Super Sentai and Kamen Rider themselves step forward into their own styles, eventually turning into their own definitive Heisei periods. The problem with Metal Heroes, however, is that it's not as definitive. Yes, the Space Sheriff trilogy and the couple of Space Sheriff-like seasons that came afterwards were thematically similar, but the franchise takes so many directions that some seasons seem like they came from 2 completely different places, like from Metalder to Ninja Jiraiya. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it aired when Kamen Rider was mostly on hiatus during that time. But here is Garo, a franchise that is so strong in its identity, so lavish in its style, and so dense in its content. Those are all aspects that the big 3 have in their own regards. I can go on and on why I think Garo is as important as the big 3. But there is one big elephant in the room that I can't ignore, and I brought this up earlier. All these big toku, including Garo, are talked about quite a bit, even if it's in passing. But there's one huge element on why it may not be part of the big 3, and that question is, where is Garo now? Garo is MIA. It ended off on Garo vs. Road, which aired during the pandemic, and has been silent ever since. And that's really too bad. Vs. Road was a great entry to the franchise, and my favorite toku of 2020. Godzilla and Power Rangers at least have something to show for their franchises. Sentai parodies returned with High School Heroes, Mirror Man's back with a brand new manga, Red Man has a comic in the US for some reason, heck, even Gamera is coming back. Garo made its funding through pachinko machines, and those had to be shut down due to COVID, so as of now, this series is dormant. Much like Ultraman and Rider, it could come back, it's just in a resting state waiting to wake up and conquer the world. But until that happens, Garo is only quote-unquote that one adult show by Keita Mamiya. Even if it does return, would it make as big an impact as Godzilla's teaser poster? Would the general public even care? I know you and I would be beyond happy for more Garo, but you and I aren't the ones playing at Japanese pachinko parlors. It's a sad thought, but even still, I truly believe Garo more than deserves to be a pillar alongside Power Rangers and Godzilla. Then those three need to be with the other big three. A double trinity, a big six. I don't know, I wasn't sure what to call it. Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, Ultraman, Power Rangers, Godzilla, and Garo. They're what I think are the pillars of Tokusatsu. Each are unique examples of the genre, and they all define it in their own ways. Maybe you disagree, but they're important to me.
Video has reached completion. See you next time.